This is the 7 Debriefings. I'm Intelligence Officer Wiz.
And I'm Weapons Specialist Zero.
Zero, how you doing, man?
A little exhausted, but it's the end of this run, so
My God,
it'll be interesting to see where we all fall on what we thought was the best of the best, and so on and so forth.
Oh, God, man. It is interesting after doing all this, how everything has felt into place in this. Why don't we just get started? So, we are here usually to discuss the cinematic adventures of one James Bond, but this week is the final assessment. We go through all 25 of the Bond films, and we rank them from their elements of what is the best, and maybe what is the worst. Zero, I think we discussed this at the end of the last episode, but I want to reiterate. If there's one thing about the Bond films that I was surprised by at the end of watching all 25, is that even though I had issues with some of the Bond films, they're all pretty quality with a few exceptions. Like, I'm looking at my top 25 here. I've ranked them all, and that's on my website for a written review of this as well. So if you want to check out my full 25, it's up there. I'm looking at the list. I think I can say like 5 or 4 are absolutely bad, whereas the rest have some quality to them and just are in varying degrees.
Yeah, there's definitely that. There's some that are mostly pretty good, but maybe have like one irredeemable flaw, like the goddamn slide whistle gag.
Oh, God, you'll never get over that, will you? But hey,
no.
That's fine. We all have those picadillos that we're kind of like about, so I'm with you there. But yeah, like, some of them have some fatal flaws, but overall, this is a really good film series, and I'm kind of understanding now why this has stood the test of time for so long, because a lot of it is good, and the exception is that it's bad. At the end of this, I'm kind of surprised where my rankings are, and that a lot of it is quality to me. All right, guys, so this is where we'd have the mission debriefings, but for today, we're just going to talk about what we think is the best with all of Bond and its certain elements. Now, when we had our mission objectives, we broke it down to certain categories. We're going to do that as well in this, and we're going to start with what we usually end with on each one, which is the theme song. Now, the theme song isn't really that important in the grand scheme of things, but it is such a distinct trademark of Bond that there is a really good or interesting or dynamic theme song for each movie. Before we tell our top 3, I want to point something out, Zero. We are not going to choose the original Dr. No theme song from Dr. No, because that is ubiquitous from all the Bond films. So I think, honestly, if we counted that, that's instantly number 1. Zero, tell me your top 3 Bond theme songs.
Top 3, Live and Let Die, You Know My Name, and Skyfall.
That's an interesting list. That's a good list. Live and Let Die is in my top 5, but the other 2 that you also are in my top 5. Here are my top 3. Number 3 is Skyfall. Number 2 is You Know My Name, and number 1 is Diamonds Are Forever. I think we talked about this in the episode, how much I love that song. After watching Casino Royale, I was kind of like, it's going to be that song, because that song is really good. It's still a song I listen to. But deep down, if there is a song that I think is identifiable to Bond, I think it's Diamonds Are Forever, and I think that is an excellent song. So I guess a question that I would really have here, there's a number of them that we don't have that are considered classics. Where would you think that something like Goldfinger or I guess GoldenEye would rank as well? Because GoldenEye is another one where I think a lot of people identify with Bond films with that theme song.
GoldenEye is, I think, my 5th place choice. Goldfinger is easily in the top 10.
It is interesting how Shirley Bassey did a lot of these theme songs, and even though, like, not all of them are great, I mean, I have Moonraker in the bottom, along with a lot of things. Moonraker, Goldfinger, and then Diamonds Are Forever, I think, are excellent. And then Goldfinger, I think, is my number 6 in my list. Now that we've gotten to that, let's get into the more cinematic elements of the Bond film. So we're going to start with the Bond girl. Zero, what is your favorite Bond girl? Top 3.
In 3rd, Pussy Galore. Okay. 2nd, Wei Lin. And then 1st, Vespa Lind.
Wei Lin is number 2. Interesting. When we discussed Wei Lin in the episode, we also talked about how she was incredibly underutilized. Why would you have Wei Lin in there?
Action and choreography-wise, she's fantastic.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And she's one of the rare exceptions of a Bond girl who can actually hold her own.
It's just unfortunate that she's so underutilized. I really couldn't put her anywhere in the top 10. She's 14 for me. And she's high that way because of what you said, that she's the most believable. And Michelle Yeoh is just great in the role, even though she's incredibly underutilized.
And it's really sad, too, because as mentioned in the Tomorrow Never Dies review, just in the Hong Kong cinema space and even mainland Chinese cinema space. She's also a bit of a comedian as well too. So she's got a wide range of talents. And then, fortunately, in America, she was just kind of written off as Asian lady who can do martial arts. Yeah, and it's just like criminally underusing this woman. My God.
I know. It is sad that it took basically Crazy Rich Asians for people to go, oh, wait a minute, she can do more than that in the U.S.? Because it's just very sad. Like, even when she kept coming back to America, she would end up doing the same roles. I think she was in The Third Mummy, and who watched that? Like, oh, God. So here are my top three. Number 3 is Tatiana Romanova from Russia with Love. 2 is Anya Amasova from The Spy Who Loved Me. And number 1, of course, is Vesper Lynd. I mean, yeah. This is not a surprise. Vesper Lynd is kind of responsible for why the Craig Bond era is so good in the first 3 movies. She really is what catapulted that Bond to be so iconic, because if it wasn't for how good she was, I don't think Craig would have been as good either. I 100% agree with Vesper Lynd on that one. I have Pussy Galore in 4. And I was debating on whether I want to put Tatiana or Pussy in 3, but I think I'm going to go with Tatiana because of just the interesting dynamic that she had with Connery Bond in From Russia with Love. That would be my thought process on that.
And Tatiana is definitely in the top 10 for me because just, again, her interaction with the Connery Bond was fantastic. And especially with the whole dynamic that she had. Some of the Bond girls are just so very interesting. I think Solitaire is kind of interesting in the case that, at least for me, I didn't realize that the actress who played her was also Dr. Quinn. I was just like, holy shit.
She was gorgeous in that movie, too. She's number 5 for me in this. I'm going to tell you who's number 9 that might surprise you. And I have Jinx Johnson from Die Another Day. And
interesting.
I do, but like, Halle Berry is very good in that role. She's having fun, and she, I think, is one of the more entertaining parts of that movie. But that seems to be kind of the Bond problem in most of these instances. Like, I have Teresa DiVincenzo, number 7 from On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Natalia from GoldenEye is number 10. Usually when the Bond girls are good, with a few exceptions, the movie's bad, because then something is wrong with Bond or the villain.
Yeah.
But with the exception, of course, Casino Royale. But number 2 is Anya, Agent Triple X from The Spy Who Loved Me. The only reason why I recommended that movie was because Anya was so good, and Barbara Bach was really good in that role. I love that character. She was instantly the most entertaining thing about that movie. But that's a weak Bond, even though I ended up enjoying it. But like, the villain and Bond in that movie is kind of weak. I will say this, my bottom 3 won't surprise you. Dr. Christmas Jones is number 21. 22 is Holly Goodhead, and the last one, the worst one, is Stacey Sutton from A View to a Kill. Like, those 3 are like bottom barrel, the worst. Although I will say, I don't think the reason why Dr. Christmas Jones is bad is because of Denise Richards. I just think she was given a shit role. And that was about it on that. Are they kind of in your bottom 2?
Oh, yes, most certainly.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so let's get into villain. I think villain is going to surprise you a little bit, Zero, but give me your top 3 villains.
In 3rd, Francisco Scaramanga, mostly because Christopher Lee was excellent as him. 2nd, Raul Silva, and 1st, Le Chiffre.
Okay, interesting. So basically, Casino Royale's villain, I think, because of how Casino Royale is so good, you chose Le Chiffre as the number 1 villain. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah, Le Chiffre was just kind of like, sort of like the mega villain planner, and it just kind of fit in with the movie so well.
So we're going to have some similarities here. I agree number 3 is Scaramanga. I agree that Christopher Lee was really good in the role. Number 2, Raul Silva from Skyfall. Absolutely agree. I think you're going to be surprised by number 1. My number 1 is Fran Sanchez from License to Kill. And
that's not a bad choice.
It's not a bad choice. To me, I would expect that to be a top 5 villain. But number 1, Fran Sanchez, is really because he makes Bond into something incredibly different than what you ever see. And then on top of that, he is so believably scummy and believably evil. He's not like over the top, but like, you can absolutely believe that someone like this exists. And he is as cold and calculated as he turns out to be. And he elevates Timothy Dalton as well in his role as Bond in that movie. So number 1 for me is Fran Sanchez. Le Chiffre is number 5 for me. What do you think about Goldfinger?
Goldfinger is easily in one of my top 10.
Okay.
I think in the grand scheme of things, Goldfinger is 5th for me. Another exceptional villain that I think, if written a little better, could have been so good was Electra King in The World Is Not Enough. If the dynamic was written a little better, I think she would have been excellent.
Yeah, she is my favorite villain of the Bond films with Brosnan. She's number 7 for me. But this is also another issue that we have with the villains as well, is that the lower that they are, it usually means the film is not great. My bottom 3 is Renard from The World Is Not Enough, Gustav Graves, and the very last villain, the worst one is, of course, Max Zorn from A View to a Kill. And what's funny about the bottom 3, 2 of the actors who are in it, which is Robert Carlyle and Christopher Walken, great actors. Absolutely great actors. And they just got shit roles. We need to point out Blofeld. There is 4 iterations of Blofeld. What is your favorite version of Blofeld, and where would he rank to you? From which movie, and where would he be?
The Spectre depiction of him is probably the better one, mostly because he gets out of the cartoonish supervillain shenanigans that a lot of the older depictions kind of like put him in. I mean, in the older movie depictions, he's depicted like in sort of like a communist style suit. He's got like this white long-haired cat that he's kind of petting while he's sitting in his chair, just listening to henchmen do stuff. It's so cartoonishly super villain like that. I'm just like, God, we're really going for that, are we? I guess so.
So that's funny because I have the Spectre version of Blofeld at the bottom. I think he's the worst one. And I think it's mainly because of basically underutilizing Christoph Waltz. And on top of that, the terrible twist that they put into this, I thought was one of the things that really ruined that character. My favorite version of Blofeld is from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and that's number 9 for me. And I think it's the best version of Blofeld, but he's number 9 for me. I have Electra King at 7. I think the only other person I want to point out is Red Grant. He's number 6 for me. He's interesting because he's not the main villain, but I thought he was the most interesting villain from Russia with Love, so I want to point that out. We are a good amount of way through our lists here. We're going by them pretty fast, so let's get to spy action. This is also the spy techniques and the action melded together. Zero, your top 3, please.
Spectre, I thought, was good in 3rd place. There is some gadget use, but I think the gadgets are used more kind of like in an interesting sort of forensic sort of way, with Q analyzing the Spectre ring to see who all has touched the ring and everything. It had some fantastic action sequences in there as well too. 2nd is Quantum of Solace, but I think that's mostly because of just the vengeance angle and how it just utilizes the action to just a brutal degree. I think one of my favorite sequences in Quantum of Solace is the opera sequence out in Bregenz, Austria, where just Bond is just kind of like trying to make an exit out of the opera house. It just kind of goes insanely crazy with him just trying to escape and not be shot and everything. So that's why Quantum is 2nd for me. And then 1st is probably going to be no surprise to anyone, Casino Royale. Just, my God, it's just the perfect package. You've got spy stuff, you've got espionage stuff, you've got fantastic action sequences. Sex is used for like espionage purposes, but it isn't like corny, in my opinion. That's where I sit on my preferences.
Okay, cool. I have number 3 as License to Kill. I have number 2 as Casino Royale, and number 1 is Skyfall for me. And Skyfall, I think, is number 1 to me because of the interesting dynamic they have in there of M and MI6 being attacked from within and it being infiltrated, and what Raul Silva does throughout the entire film as well, and how he outsmarts everyone to a certain extent throughout the film as well. And I think that interesting dynamic, along with what Bond has to do in that film, makes the action and the spy elements really good in that end. We discussed throughout our time with this that it just seemed like the action kept getting better and better incrementally as the time went on. But I gotta be honest with you, as true as I felt around that time, if I look at my list, it doesn't really reflect that. I mean, I have Dr. No as number 12 in my list, and I think because of the spy element, it's a lot better. GoldenEye is number 4 for me. I think the action in GoldenEye is really good, even though I think some people might scoff at that. When you look back at the different action sequences and things from the other Bond films, what do you think sticks out to you more as better? The one of the old style where it's more spy element oriented, or more of the action orientation that was more prevalent in, let's say, the Moore type or the Daltons?
It really kind of tears me apart because, much like you, just the earlier movies where they really get into sort of the spying and espionage sorts of things, I think it makes the movie so interesting because it isn't like a brainless sort of just turn off your brain, it's going to be crazy action and whatever. It ends up kind of making you think of, my God, Bond's really fucking clever, or he smells that this is a setup, so he's gonna get the drop on the bad guys. Like in Doctor No, I love the setup where just he ends up with the assistant for one of the professors who's totally in on Doctor No's schemes, ends up meeting her up, and she's trying to get him set up to be assassinated, but he gets the drop on her and gets her hauled off to be interrogated, and then he ends up kind of staying in her bungalow, and then of course the professor comes by going, "Oh, oh, the lights are on. Let me come inside." When he gets inside, Bond just gets the drop on him, like, oh god, what a clever play. Then you've got like some of the later movies where just the action's fantastic. I think for me, just where the action really started to get great was around GoldenEye. Fantastic action sequences. The choreography for like the gun battles was so good. And then of course the crazy, crazy, crazy chase through St. Petersburg in a Russian tank.
Hmm.
That is just so hard to beat for the action stuff. And then you get to the Craig saga, and it's just like, oh, did you think the action was great? No, we're turning it up a notch. It's like, oh god. But at
Yeah.
the same time, just some of the spying stuff kind of got thrown out to the breeze during the Pierce Brosnan era,
Oh yeah.
especially when they really started just to load them up on gadgets. It would be like, yeah, this gadget's an I win button. Just press this thing and you win. It's great. It's just like, damn it. Bond is supposed to be scrappy. He's not supposed to, just be over reliant on his fucking gadgets. God damn it, guys.
Yeah, I agree, and that's the action in the Brosnan era. I think was very good, but then you're absolutely right. The spy elements, the things that make him more interesting and much more intelligent, kind of just went to the wayside, and then just for gadgetry and everything. I absolutely agree on that. What would you say is the best action in any of the Brosnan eras?
As far as the Brosnan era, I want to say probably I am so torn between Tomorrow Never Dies with some of the action sequences with Michelle Yeoh, and I think really just GoldenEye is the other one that I'm just kind of torn between, just because
Okay.
the choreography for a lot of the fight scenes was just really good, and in some cases you could just feel how frenetic the fights were becoming and everything.
I have it as GoldenEye, but I kind of agree with you. I think the one that I have the least is Die Another Day, because I just think the way they shot those action sequences and how ridiculous they were just like, ugh, all right. I've had enough of this. So, all right. So before we get into the two main things, let us ask some questions about the future of Bond as well. And I'm going to start with this first question. Zero, will Bond movies be more like the Craig films moving forward, or will they be more like the previous Bond films?
That's an interesting question, mostly because, in my opinion, I think Daniel Craig will be a hard Bond to top,
Mm-hmm.
especially because of just the physicality of some of the stunts. I think one of my favorite stunt sequences was the first fight scene in A Quantum of Solace, where they just fall through the glass roof and they're just fighting on the scaffolding and everything. Just, I think Daniel Craig ended up getting quite a serious injury from that particular stunt sequence too, and he said that I think it was one of the most physically taxing stunts that he ended up having to film, mostly because of just having to balance himself on the rope and all the other crazy stuff in that sequence. So a lot of the stunt work in Craig Saga movies, they were very, very physically intensive. I think really the only way that I could see the next Bond maybe pivoting or making itself unique is maybe either trying to determine stylistically how they want to go. If they want to kind of go historical, maybe kind of turn back the clock to the 50s and kind of go with
Hmm.
sort of old-timey style Bond and try to go even more close and respectful to the novels, then that could be an approach. Or maybe they just continue on with the setting that the Daniel Craig movies were doing, which was more modern day contemporary. So just you've got technology that's within reason, or maybe the technology is 5 or 10 years, or maybe 20 or 30 years away. Kind of like the weird smart blood stuff that they were using to track Bond in Skyfall and everything. That's one way that they could try to do things, in my opinion. The other factor to this is they're going to have to try to play a balancing act, because if they try to shake things too much, then it may turn away the core audience that the Bond films have built. And No Time to Die, I still remember the controversy when some of the script was revealed that there was going to be a new 007, and oh, Jesus, the message board fighting, Twitter fights, my God, it was the most crazy time for that sort of stuff, because I'm not going to say I'm the most hardcore Bond fan, but I still remember when that was revealed, you had some people going, and Bond's going to be a woman and black? Ah, fuck this, I'm done with this. And I'm just like, you don't even know the context. Maybe Bond's retired and, just someone's taken up his number. I don't know, just don't freak out just yet. And then it ended up exactly being that. That's where I think it's also going to be additionally hard, because there's just so many moving parts that they're going to have to balance. And with all this elements in just a bigger clockwork of proverbial machinery, just I'm honestly going to be curious on how this all will pan out.
You mentioned some pretty good points there. I didn't think that they would actually go back to the past, but that's actually not a bad idea. Why aren't you writing these? What do you
God, if I was writing movies, I think I wouldn't be doing podcasts.
That is true. That is true. I agree with you a little bit, but what I'm afraid of is that they're going to start remaking the old Connery Bonds. Honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if they decide to do that. And we find out the first movie that's next is Dr. No. And they're like, oh, we're just rebooting. I'm like, oh, God, no. Why would you do that? But I can almost see them doing that to a certain extent. What they cannot do is revert it back to the old ways. You need to have an ongoing plot throughout this time that happened with the Craig era. You've already started that. You can't go back. It would be such a step backwards at that point. So I think that they're going to continue that, but Bond will have some key differences as well. What the differences will be, I am not entirely sure. They might go more comedic in that end because of how serious that Bond was in the Craig era. So they probably want to make it a little bit different from that point, which I think may not be such a great idea. Other than that, I don't know where they would go moving forward. What they can't do is then say, okay, let's bring it back to where it was like Connery. They can't do that. They really, really can't do that. Unless, like you said, they decide we're going to go to the 50s and 60s and start this, which would be interesting. But I think they still need an overarching plot line throughout this time. And of course, they're going to have to find the right Bond to do it. So let's talk about who the potential next Bond might be. These are all rumored frontrunners as of right now, Zero. We have Henry Cavill, who is Superman. Aaron Taylor-Johnson, we have Theo James, Taron Egerton, which is the guy who is in The Kingsman, and there is a small contingency that thinks Tom Hardy might be a frontrunner as well. Zero, what do you think of those frontrunners, or do you have somebody in mind that you would like to see?
The only names I'm familiar with out of the list are Henry Cavill, Aaron Taylor-Johnson, and Taron Egerton. The rest I'm just not too familiar with.
Wait, you're not familiar with Bane? Tom Hardy?
No.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. Go ahead. Sorry.
The best way I can put it is, ever since the Daniel Craig saga sort of changed my mind on things, the way I see it is, if they can play the role respectfully and just do a fantastic job on it, I'm open to whatever. Because in the beginning of the Daniel Craig saga, when he was named, I was just I was like most people, I was just like, a blonde Bond, what the? I don't know. I'm just not sure. And I was just like, all right, just he's kind of a beefcake dude. All right, sure, whatever. Just I don't know how this is gonna pan out. And he ended up surprising me as being one of my favorites of all time. So for me, I'm just kind of like, I'll let it roll, and we'll see how it goes. And if they pick the actor that plays the role respectfully and just nails it, then fantastic, you've won me over. But if it's just someone who's just like, I'm just here because of the name and the prestige, I don't really care about the role, then I'll just be like, God, just no.
I don't think anyone will take the role for just that, because what Eon and what MGM usually does when they choose a new Bond is they lock him in, which is, I think, what they did with both Brosnan and they did it with Craig. And that always became a problem later on down the road, because I think Craig specifically wanted out after Skyfall, but they kept throwing him more money and more money and more money to have him stay. So I don't think the choice of an actor saying, I'll just do it for the name, I don't think they're going to do it for the name for 3 or 4 movies. That said, I don't like any of the frontrunners at all. First off, any of the known names, Henry Cavill, Taron Egerton, Tom Hardy. I doubt they'll take it. And I doubt that Eon and MGM would take it either because they usually go for not well-known names. When Daniel Craig was picked, the thing that he was most known for was a supporting performance in Road to Perdition. Before that movie, he got a little more well-known in Layer Cake, which is, I think, probably movies you haven't even heard of. Maybe you've heard of Road to Perdition.
Heard of both movies, never got a chance to watch them though.
Oh, okay. They purposely go for the ones that are not as well known. I'm looking at the list right now. I don't see any of these guys getting it. I think it's going to be someone young who's up and coming, who hasn't been a part of a franchise. That's the other thing, too. Cavill, Hardy, and Edgerton are part of franchise. They don't need to be Bond. They always want to choose somebody who needs to be Bond so they can lock him in for that time. If you get Cavill will probably do one film and that's it. And Cavill will have the right to do that because he's a known name. I don't think the person who will be Bond is one of the ones listed, is my opinion on this. It's going to be somebody who is lesser known that then will be thrust into the spotlight when he's announced to be the new Bond. And people go like, who's that? And then they'll watch his movies and go, I don't see it. And then we're going to have this conversation all over again. Looking forward to it. So with the potential next Bond, we should talk about some of the things that Bond is known for. So, Zero, what Bond tropes do you think should go?
For me, it's going to be the corny womanizing and the wacky cartoonish villains in some of the movies, because those are the two elements that I never really liked. Maybe a close third would be over-reliance on gadgets that end up being literary deus ex machinas. That's the thing that I really didn't like during the Brosnan era. Just, I'm in a jam. Oh, what a coincidence. I've got a gadget to get me out of that jam. I think those would be my personal picks on just tropes that need to go, because we had the Craig era. The first couple movies didn't really have gadgets, but whatever modern day technologies that Bond did have access to, he did leverage them to an interesting way. In Quantum of Solace, him using a Sony Ericsson high-powered camera phone to take pictures and upload the pictures to an MI6 database to find out the identities of the people at the opera house. I was just like, okay, that's a little overkill for a camera on a camera phone to be able to take digital SLR grade pictures with like a massive zoom lens sort of levels of fiction, but I'll let it slide because it's a spy movie.
Yeah, like that's fine to me because it's like, you always have to think that, what the government has is usually better than what we have. So is it kind of believable in that sense is how I look at it. I think that womanizing kind of took a back seat in the Craig era, didn't it?
In my opinion, it did. I'm actually thankful for it because, oh God, the Brosnan era was so bad with it.
Yeah. I agree with most of what you're saying here. The womanizing, which I think has been curbed, and then the cartoonish supervillains, which that also is curbed, but then they kind of rely on it when they have a weak villain in the Craig era, so I get that. I think the other thing I want to see go away is an incompetent M. We dealt with incompetent M's in both the Craig and Brosnan eras, both with Judi Dench as M, and then again with Ralph Fiennes as M as well. I wouldn't mind if we don't see M at all, and then have Moneypenny be out in the field giving messages from M, and M is just like a person that you never see. I wouldn't mind that so much, but they're going to choose somebody as M. I already know that. All right, so we've got down to the questions. Let's get to the final two categories, Zero, and that is who is the best Bond? Give me your six in order.
Sixth place is going to be Pierce Brosnan. We've already gone over why, so I don't think we need to retread that. Fifth place, I feel a little bit bad, but mostly it's because he didn't really have much screen time, so I really didn't get a good feel for him, and that's just George Lazenby, because he was only in one movie and then gone. I thought he was fine, but it's just so hard to get an impression of an actor that plays Bond just from one singular movie. Roger Moore, he is one of the classic Bond actors, but he was also the beginning of the corny one-liners. That was where you had some of the corny womanizing scenes at the end where just finishes the mission, MI6 is contacting him, and he's off in bed with whatever Bond girl is being featured in the movie. So I get that he's a classic, but also he's one of the folks that brought about some of the worst tropes in the Bond movies. Third, Sean Connery. He's The first Bond, he's fantastic when he's just got to be brutal about things, but he's got kind of sharp, witty delivery when he's being a bit jovial. I think he's fantastic for that. Second would be Timothy Dalton, mostly because I thought it was fantastic, even though he did have a very short run of 2 movies. First movie he's in, he's just brutally effective Bond, but ends up kind of having a little bit of a soft side when it comes down to things. And then in the second movie, it's more driven by revenge. So you see an interesting and emotional side to Bond that usually isn't something you see in some of the Bond movies. And then this is probably no surprise to anyone listening to this, but Craig is just first place. He's the complete package of what I would consider a very, very excellent Bond. Fantastic on the action and stunt work stuff. He can be a real cold bastard when he needs to be. Just the fact that he was very, very involved in a lot of the stunt work that was set up in the movies that he was in. It also kind of brings sort of the physicality back home instead of kind of like having another actor to sub in to be the stuntman or whatever. That's why Craig just gets top honors for me.
We have the same exact ranking. I thought that we would have a little bit of a difference in this, but I guess I'm not surprised really because it kind of makes sense to us. We both had big issues with Brosnan after we watched those 4 movies. Lazenby I agree with. It's kind of hard to really gauge where he is, but he only had 1, and he was kind of meh in it. Moore, he's been in the most, correct? He's been in 7?
I think so.
Yeah, he's been in the most, but he also had probably the slipperiest of track records. He either was good in some, bad in others, but there was never really an outstanding time that he was Bond. Connery started it all, and he did have some very good Bond moments in his time. Dalton, if it wasn't for the fact he only did 2, I think he probably would have been number 1 in this, but he did a fantastic job in the 2 that he did. I agree with you. And then Craig just broke it open with an entirely new way to look at Bond, and I think that's correct on your end. That's very deserved on that one. I kind of agree with you on the previous question about who will take over after Craig. I feel bad for that person because they've
got some big shoes to step into.
Yeah, they do. And I almost feel like what they're going to do is they're not even going to attempt to outdo Craig. They're just going to make it his own thing, which may be a good idea on that end. But then I don't think he's going to reach the next 3. I don't think he's going to be anywhere near Craig, Dalton, or Connery. But we'll see when that happens. So, yeah, we share the same exact ranking. I would have never thought that. Interesting.
Yeah, I'm just honestly shocked because I figured I was just like, Wiz is probably going to have some different stuff, so we'll see where this goes.
But you know what? Looking back, it kind of makes sense with how we felt about most of these films. All right, Zero, we are at the end of the 007 debriefings. But before we go, we have to talk about what was the best film in the 25-film filmography of the Bond character. Zero, your top 3.
Third, Living Daylights.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, that one was fantastic. Second would be Skyfall. And then first, no surprise to anyone, Casino Royale.
Oh, yeah. I mean, 3 for me is From Russia with Love. 2 is License to Kill. 1 is Casino Royale. I agree with you. Casino Royale is by far and away the best Bond film. Nothing beats it at this point. I'm a little surprised that The Living Daylights is higher than License to Kill. Where is License to Kill in your ranking if you were to choose?
It's definitely top 10.
Okay, cool. Yeah, Living Daylights is actually number 4 for me. The best Connery one, of course, is From Russia with Love. But the second one from Connery would be Goldfinger, and that's number 5 for me. And then you have Skyfall number 2. I have it at 6. But where's From Russia with Love with you? I know you were kind of cool on From Russia with Love, or am I more fanatical about it? I'm not entirely sure. But
I'm cool on it, but it's definitely top 10.
I think some might be surprised with my rankings. Like, for example, I have Octopussy number 8. That might be surprising to some because I have The Spy Who Loved Me at number 11. But, like, the only reason why I liked The Spy Who Loved Me was because of Barbara Bach. Whereas Octopussy, I think, was a much more well-rounded and entertaining film. In my top 10, I don't have any Brosnan era. Brosnan only comes up at number 14 with Goldeneye, and then that's it. That's where he starts. And it's kind of surprising. Brosnan is where I got started on Bond and where I started to like the character. And then to find that I find his the most disappointing is kind of a surprise to me. When it comes to the Brosnan ones, what's the highest one that you have?
It's definitely going to be Goldeneye, and I think Goldeneye for me is within top 10.
I think another surprise I'll have is Diamonds Are Forever is number 10 for me. I see a lot of articles that really clown on Diamonds Are Forever, which call it the worst of the Bond films, which I look at and go, did you guys see A View to a Kill? Did you see A Die Another Day?
Going through all all 25 movies was one hell of an experience, even if it did take almost 6 months to do it.
Oh, God.
I think we had mentioned it after we got done recording the last episode that thank God some of these were redeemable, because what a pain it would have been to just have gone through like a solid block of just bad Bond movies in a row. It just have been like, nope, pull the plug, just fucking kill it on the vine. I'm not interested. I don't want to brutalize myself anymore.
Yeah, and honestly, the one that was the sketchiest was the Moore era, really, because it would have good, bad, bad, good, bad, and then you would be like, oh my God, what the hell? And then Dalton just came and went like, whoa, okay, I like the direction they're going here. For the most part, it's quality stuff here. It's fun. It's entertaining. And then, again, for the most part, that's what most of the films are, with some exceptions, of course. I will say this, though. I think the only other franchise I can think of that has about as much films is Star Trek, and I don't think I'd do this for Star Trek. I'm not a Star Trek fan, of course. I would like to get into it at some point, but that's one film series where if I had the choice to do something like this for Star Trek, I would be like, no, I'm not doing that. That's nuts. That's a little nutty on that end. But I'm glad we did this. I'm glad, and I'm surprised and delighted as well that we were able to stick it out this entire time. Would I suggest somebody doing this? No. I would never suggest someone that say, watch all 25 like we did. If you want to do it piece by piece, that's probably the best way as well. So what about you? Do you think that doing it piece by piece is better, or would you suggest somebody to do this gauntlet is what you call it?
I would say that if you kind of want to look at the Bond movies, decide which era you want to look into. If you're a big 90s person and the 90s was like your big time, then go with the Brosnan era. You'll probably be fine with that. If you want something more modern day contemporary, Craig all the way. That's going to be easy. And then, of course, if you want sort of like the corny sort of tropes and stuff, maybe look at the Roger Moore era stuff. If you kind of want more spy and espionage and maybe aren't kind of weirded out by some of the tropes from the 50s and 60s, consider the Sean Connery era. So that would be how I would put it to anyone who might be curious to kind of go through the various cycles of Bond. Just choose which era you want to go with and just take it in by blocks. But I would not recommend anyone to do this unless you're just a masochist.
Yeah, I'm a movie nut, so this wasn't so bad for me, but I could imagine you one day being like, oh God, I gotta do it again. It's like, oh crap. But like, I agree with you. Like, if you want to start watching Bond, just choose a block. Just choose either any of the 6 and go from there. I suspect a lot of people who listen to this will probably start with Brosnan or maybe even Craig. And if you find yourself really liking it, then go back. These do not need to be in order. It's up to you in that end. But if you like yours a little more comedic, you don't have to watch all of them. You don't have to start from the beginning. You can just go wherever you want and just start up from there. Just choose which one that you think you're more comfortable. Now, if you want my full review on this movie, you can go to my website at IamTheWiz.com. You'll have my full written review right on the site, along with a link to the video that has this review that you've just listened to. All right, Zero, this is it. This is the final 007 debriefing. How does it feel for it to be over?
It's a little sad, mostly because just I wish that the Daniel Craig era was closed out a little bit better, but yeah, who knows what the future will bring.
I agree with the thing with the Craig era. I always wanted to watch all 25 of these, and I'm glad I got to do it for the podcast, and this was fun. But like I said, I would never do this again. I would never do so many of these films again. Like, I'm considering doing, like, Back to the Future at some point, but those are 3 films. Like, all right, whatever, that's 3 films. So I'm more game for that. But nothing this long again. This was insane. Good Lord. We were going to come back for the 007 debriefings when a new Bond film comes out, if we're still doing the podcast. So, if a new Bond film comes out, Zero, we're going to come back, repost in our stations, and talk about the Bond film as we did before. So, can't wait for that to happen. How about you?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I'm not much of a movie theater guy, so it'll probably be just waiting for a VOD release from the various online services and stuff like that. That's probably how I'll be watching it.
Yeah, I'm the same way now, too. I used to love going to theaters. Now I can't do it anymore. It's like they're just not fun for me anymore. So, well, that's it, guys. Thank you for listening to the 007 Debriefings. I'm Intelligence Officer Wiz.
And I'm Weapons Specialist Zero.
Talk to you guys when it comes back. Bye.